I voluntarily enlisted even though I had a full scholarship. I decided my country was more important than me going to college.
I brought a platoon picture of what all of us young, good-looking guys looked like back then.
It's been 36 years since the last combat units came off the line and came home.
When I landed at the San Francisco airport, I was spit on. I was called a baby killer.
Well, it hurt everybody's feelings.
People were against the war, so they were against us, basically.
And I couldn't never understand that.
So I went in the men's room, took off my uniform, threw it in a garbage can, and put on civilian clothes to wear the rest of the way home.
And all we were doing is a job that we were asked to do.
We don't hold it against American people.
I was not one of these guys that wore fatigues or wore t-shirts or anything like that after Vietnam. I just figured that was a chapter in my life that was over.
When the Vietnam soldiers returned home from war, they came to a country that was in protest against the government and against them. Many soldiers were spit upon, abused, and protested. These protests led soldiers to keep quiet about the war for a long time and to even throw away their uniforms. They did not want to be known as Vietnam veterans because to the public, Vietnam veterans were bad people.
You know, the Armed Forces radio and the newspaper, they kind of kept things from you, you know. So we, you know, from the letters I got home, there was protesters, but I didn't think it was that bad.
Coming home was like coming home to a different country. In '68, it seemed like there was so much going on back home that I didn't know about. That it was Martin Luther King had been assassinated, Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. I didn't know any of that. And the people themselves, they didn't look like the same. They had all long hair. They were all screaming, get back on the plane, you baby killer, throwing tomatoes at you. You name it, that's what they did. Mainly on the West Coast.
Came back 13 months later, it was like coming back to a whole different civilization, you know. And so, you know, I wasn't here. I certainly could have been impressed by it as it was developing, and it was a real shock to my system to see how this country had gone from some casual disobedience to massive disobedience, or at least certainly you know, a contradiction to what the people in Washington were telling us to do.
I was spit on, I was cursed, baby killer, I don't know what other names I was called. I've heard other stories about people who came back about the same time as I did. You kind of land at Travis Air Force Base out in San Francisco. That's kind of where you came into most of the time. And guys throwing their uniforms in the garbage because they just didn't want to be abused by people who were outside the base or down in San Francisco being a hotbed of protest anything, you know, at that point in time.
Cab picked us up in Oakland, Army Terminal, and as we were heading for San Francisco, stopped at a light. And both of us are in the back seat with our uniforms on. And this car pulled up alongside of us, rolled down his window, and spit on the window. And so that was my first, you know, what's this? You know? So we told the cab driver, as soon as you get down in San Francisco, you got to get us to a men's clothing store, and we got to get out of these uniforms, you know.
It took me like 10 years to admit that I was in this service for a lot of reasons. Not, you know, I went to college and I was only like 18 months older than anybody in my class, but you couldn't, you know, they looked at you a little differently because you were a veteran, you'd been to Vietnam and stuff, and if I didn't have a veterans fraternity at college, I wouldn't have really probably made it through college because it was really tough. You know, it's hard to imagine, but it was. You know, even when you came home on leave before I went to Vietnam, people were like, "Oh, you're in the service?" You know, just about everybody.
When I was job interviewing and what have you, where people just asked, where you been, Carl? I said, I've been to Vietnam, and that was the end of the conversation. Look at you like, didn't say anything, so there was nobody to talk to.
One of the comments that I made as I was entering that plane, I remembered taking off my hat, looking up to the top of the airplane and telling God that I would never complain about anything. Thank you very, very much for helping me go home.
You all know that during the Vietnam War, the troops returned home during the course of the war individually. There are many people who never had the opportunity to let them know how they felt. It is therefore my distinct honor to offer you a long overdue welcome home to the United States of America after each of you well and faithfully served our great nation overseas.
I didn't get it when I got back. I didn't get there.
Our troops went through a lot when they came back, and it was undeserved. It truly was. But that's ancient history, and the important thing today is they're being recognized for what they did. They're being welcomed back as patriots and soldiers and men who went and did their duty, and that's what it was all about.
It feels good, but it hurts. There's a lot of guys that should be here that aren't. I lost a lot of friends.
The veterans who were not able to be here, I'm sure that they're watching from up above, but the ones who can't receive the thank yous and the applause, that's what hurts.
Even though these protests are not relevant today, we should treat soldiers and veterans with the respect they deserve, considering they make it possible for us to live in this great country.